For most of my life, when I've told people that I'm from Kansas, they often respond with a dumb joke about the Wizard of Oz. Many of you have likely been such offenders. Occasionally, it's about Toto or sparkly red shoes, but usually it's like, so there's no place like home, huh? And I usually say to them, you're the first person to ever make that joke. But for Yaakov in this week's parasha, there really was no place like home. For over 20 years, he's been away from his homeland, the land of his fathers and his upbringing. And he finally is making the journey to return to that land. In the time away, Yaakov was deceived by his father-in-law Lavan, marries Leah and then Rachel, has a dozen children, and reunites with Esau. Then he finally enters back into the land of Canaan through the city of Shechem. Vayavo Yaakov shalem ir Shechem asher be'eretz Canaan v'vo'o mipadan Aram vayichan et pnei ha'ir. Yaakov came in peace to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram and he encamped before the city. The Torah makes sure that we know that Shechem is in Eretz Canaan, that this verse is the fulfillment of an earlier promise from God to Yaakov. V'hashivoticha el ha'adama hazot. I will return you to this land. Yaakov was gone for a long time, but God made sure to complete God's promise of bringing Yaakov back. But the verse also tells us that Yaakov arrived in Shechem shalem. He arrived in peace, or he arrived whole. 20 years ago, when he was fleeing his parents' home from Esau's wrath, Yaakov had that dream with the angels going up and down the ladder, and God made the promise to return him to the land. And when Yaakov woke up and when he was repeating God's promise, he inserted the word Vishalom. Vishavti Vishalom el Beit Avi. God will bring me back in peace to the house of my father. We can understand that Yaakov's intense desire not just to be brought back, but to be brought back in peace. We can imagine the fear, vulnerability, and the brokenness that Yaakov felt in the moment he uttered those words, just after leaving his house, deceiving his father, and fearing that Esau will kill him. He needed to believe that when he would return to that land someday, he would do so in peace. Sforno makes the direct connection between his arrival in peace in real time and Yaakov's request for peace 20 years before. Shehigia b'shalom be'eretz Canaan kemo she'amar v'shavti b'shalom. Because he arrived in peace in the land of Canaan, as he had said, bring me back in peace. Sforno creates a framing for the years that Yaakov has been away from Canaan. On one end with the request for a peaceful return, and upon his arrival, are being informed that he has come in peace. Reshit Rabbah unpacks the layers of this word shalem in our parasha when Yaakov returns. Shalem begufo, whole in his body because he had been cured from the limp he got in his wrestling match. Shalem b'mamono, whole in his finances because he hadn't lost anything in the gift he prepared to give to Esau. And shalem b'torato, whole in his Torah, because he had not forgotten anything while he was in Laban's house. This return in shlemut, whole in his body, his money, and in his Torah, seems like the perfect response to his tefillah, the happily ever after to the drama of Yaakov's life of upheaval. But unfortunately, we know exactly what the rest of Yaakov's life looks like. And we know this shlemut does not bring with it the end of the difficulty in his life. Ibn Ezra writes that the Torah had to tell us that he entered in peace because of what was about to happen. Sheba b'shalom shelo era lo shum me'ora ki ata yafil l'saper me'ora dina. That he came in peace and that nothing had happened to him because now the Torah will begin to tell us of the event of Dinah. As if to say that he arrived in peace because we know what is about to happen. that with the rape of his daughter, there is no way he can feel the shlemut that he prayed for. Because while Yaakov prayed to be returned in peace, and he is returned in peace, it's in the land of his fathers that his daughter Dinah is raped. And it's in the land of his fathers where he returned Bishalom that his favorite wife dies. And it's in that land that his son Reuben sleeps with his concubine Bilhah. And we know later on that it's in that land of his fathers where his sons sell Yosef, his favorite, into slavery. The irony of this pasuk is that while Yaakov has been seeking to return Bishalom to the land of his fathers for the majority of his adult life, and while his arrival there was what he prayed it might be, his life in the land of his fathers is hardly one of shlemut. He has been given what he requested, return to his father's house in peace. He has wealth, family, safety, and security, but only for that moment. This parasha makes clear that the shlemut he seeks is short-lived at best. So what is it that Yaakov wants, and why can't he find it? I think Yaakov wants something simple. He wants something easy. And when he asks to be returned with shalom, he doesn't realize that life after that entrance might also be hard. Yaakov wants to return to the land of his fathers and have everything be perfect, or at the very least, be as it was when he left as a young man. Yaakov wants to return in peace because perhaps he thinks that the time away he spent will be the hardest years of his life. And he doesn't realize that his life at home won't be the same when he comes back. Yaakov is not the same and the full life. But when he comes back to Canaan 20 years later, he and his life are no longer simple. Yaakov longed to return home, longed for the simple life he had lived before he left, and he thought that returning home would be enough. But sometimes returning to a place or a moment in our past isn't the answer to our problems. On an existential level, we have to ask what happens when we return home, but just returning is not enough. When returning doesn't actually grant us shlemut. I remember exactly 7 years ago, this week, the week after Thanksgiving, I sat with a student when I was a resident advisor in college. He had been so excited to go home for the holiday weekend. He wouldn't have to worry about impending final exams or the fraternity he was rushing or what to make for dinner. But when he got home for the holiday, his parents told him they were getting a divorce. It wasn't what he expected, and home no longer felt like home. I remember he said to me, "It's like I have to be an adult now. I can't just expect to be coddled by my parents and think that going home will ever be the same." We all have moments where we realize that our home isn't the same and that we can't be a child anymore. We realize that simply returning home isn't everything we need to feel comfortable because home changes and we change as well. Nothing is ever as simple at home as we might like it to be. And because that is true, just returning to the place of home will not bring us wholeness, will not grant us shlemut. Yaakov can't find the shlemut he seeks because he is so focused on his goal of getting back to home safely that he fails to see that cultivating relationships of those around him are the essence of him finding shlemut. Jacob is so focused on the unchanging nature of home that he fails to understand that the people have all changed, including him. He expects Esau to want to kill him because that's how things were left all those years ago. But times have changed, and Esau has changed. And so, with this perspective, when Yaakov reunites with Esau, and the possibility for a loving reconciliation presents itself, and the ability to create a deep human connection is staring him in the face, he doesn't seize the opportunity because he does not understand that it is the person of his brother, not the place of their father, that will bring him shlemut. And when he has finally entered the land and his daughter is raped, His odd passivity, so painfully thrust in his face by his sons, may be because his obsession with being in the land of his father blinds him to the need to cultivate relationships with the people around him, caring for what matters most. When the text tells us that Yaakov entered the land of his father Shalem, it uses the terms that Yaakov himself established 20 years ago when he was running away. For Yaakov, Shlemut was tied to the place of Canaan, returning to the place of his coddled childhood, unharmed. But what Yaakov needed was an evolving understanding of Shlemut, and he comes to understand that the terms he had established aren't meaningful anymore. It's not the physical protection. It's the sense of home, unchanged, unchanging, that he seems to crave. We can respond to Breshit Rabbah and say that yes, Yaakov arrived healed in his body, with money in his pocket, and with Torah uncorrupted by Lavan. And that was the shlemut that he had in that moment. The shlemut that he seeks, and essentially that we all seek, has nothing to do with the place where we live, or the wealth that we have, or if we are in the land of our father. The shlemut that Yaakov seeks and that he almost doesn't figure out throughout his life is not about returning to a physical place, but about the people that accompany him on his long and tortured journey. At the end of Yaakov's life, he says to Yosef when they reunite that he never thought he would see his face again. And now God has let him see not just Yosef's face, but his sons' faces as well. This is Yaakov telling us, I've finally figured it out in my final days, what it means to find a shlemut. This moment happens not in the land of Canaan, in the land of his fathers, but in Mitzrayim. Yaakov is weak, Yaakov is blind, and he has come to Egypt as a supplicant, as a poor refugee from famine. And yet, it is in this moment that Yaakov expresses the deepest sense of gratitude that we ever hear from him. This is the shlemut that he seeks. This is not a shlemut tied to a land, or a shlemut tied to a sense of childhood, but a shlemut created out of a love for people who are around him right now, in this moment, no matter where he is. Shlemut, wholeness, is about the people who go with us as we travel through the twists and turns of our lives. We are all B'nai Israel, descendants of this flawed man, and I can relate to his impulse. At this moment, more than I can remember in my entire life, I deeply feel that longing to crawl under the blankets of protection I'll call home. That craving for something that won't change and won't get difficult. For the majority of the last 10 years, I've made a home in this building. But you are changing, and this place will change, and I am changing. And those are good things. I don't know exactly what shlemut will feel like for me, but what I learned from Yaakov Avinu is that trying to find it within a content place in my past will leave me blind to those around me in my present. And that blindness, like Yaakov's, could leave me unprotected as I move into my future.